All right, good afternoon. You're at the fourth of 4 executive track sessions at Gateway to Innovation today. Today, we'll have a panel discussion on the right vendor for your IT project. My name's Tim Saunders with 1904 Labs. This is our 6th year partnering with Gateway to Innovation. We're proud to be associated with the premier tech conference in St. Louis that donates so much back to the local community here. We're also proud to be a sponsor of this track, the executive track. I was talking before, from all my sessions attending this, I would usually almost always end up in all of these sessions. So I was very excited when I was asked to help introduce these sessions. 1904 Labs is an IT consulting company. We help executives that are charged with transforming their business, especially trying to overcome challenges associated with building custom digital solutions. Challenges such as how to move applications to the cloud or how to gain alignment between the IT and business. We build teams with startup-minded people that love to solve our clients' crunchiest problems, typically in modern software, data, or decision science domains. And we place a heavy emphasis on the human-centered part of the application development. So we're not only building the right thing for the customer, but also for all the users that will use it. On your seat, I'll introduce our speaker in a second, but just want to point out, on your seat there's a card. Sean will talk about that card. So look around if you don't have one. Sean will talk about that. But I would like to now introduce our moderator today, Sean Walsh. Sean is a co-founder and managing director at 1904 Labs. During the first half of his 30-year plus career, Sean was a senior IT executive at large organizations like IBM, Accenture, Cambridge Technology Partners, and Novell. Later on, he co-founded and led several venture and private equity-backed startups, including co-founding 1904 Labs in 2016. During this time, he has provided solutions to Fortune 500 clients across a diverse set of industries. Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Tim. So today's topic is choosing the right vendor for your project. So obviously, people doing that, the CIO and their members of their team, they have lots of options, and we're going to talk about that. And this need for speed and cost coming from the business and coming from finance. Remote work, increased globalization of work due to the pandemic is kind of I like to think of it as a disruptive. Andy Grove, I don't know if you've read the book, Only the Paranoid Survive, but he talks about a strategic inflection point. I think the pandemic was a strategic inflection point for our industry. And then obviously you've got budget issues from the economic shifts that are going on. So these folks on the stage here, and those of you that are in similar roles in the audience, you have a lot going on trying to figure these things out. So I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves. We'll go from left to right, so we'll start with Anika. And I've asked them to not only give you a background on who they are and what they're responsible for, but something fun about themselves as well. So Anika, first up.
Hi, I'm Anika Gardenhire. I am the Chief Customer Experience Officer at Centene Corporation. Several of you probably know the buildings right around the corner. And my fun fact, for those of you who haven't ever played 2 Truths and a Lie with me, I'm going to tell you the answer to my 2 truths and a lie, because I do that a lot, right, for icebreakers. Typically, I go with, I have volunteered after several major disasters, so earthquake in Haiti and Katrina. My other one is I have been cow tipping in my lifetime. Just so you know, I am originally from South Carolina, right? And the other one is I have once gotten a speeding ticket for going over 100 miles per hour, which was like super scary. My lie is the speeding ticket. So I have actually been cow tipping, and I really like to volunteer. I'm a registered nurse by clinical background, so it's my fun fact.
Nice, good ones. Hey, good afternoon. I'm Scott Richert. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Mercy. Mercy's a integrated healthcare system headquartered in St. Louis, and we've got 44 hospitals across the Midwest and 400 physician practices. I don't have a lot of fun facts, but I guess one thing that's not on my LinkedIn page at least is I played the drums for a long time, and in my younger years, for like a year and a half, the pop star Sheryl Crow was in my band before she left St. Louis, so that's my drum claim to fame.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Mari George. I'm the CIO at Mohela, which is Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority. We service student loans, so people love us deeply. I've been there about 5 years. Fun factoid, I have 6 kids, so I became a long-distance runner to get away from them. I've run 25 marathons, and my 26th marathon is going to be in June, and the one I ran 25 years ago, my time is off because I was pregnant, so that kid is going to run that marathon with me in a month.
Nice.
But I'm not carrying him this time. He's going to have
Jonathan Andrews, Director of Data Governance Platforms for Mastercard. Recently joined Mastercard about 7 months ago. Before that has been at Charter, 30 plus years in the business, the last 6 or 7 predominantly in the data and governance space. So it'll be an interesting conversation. Fun fact is, which one do I go with? Do I go with the America's Cup Sailing or the Bellagio? I'll go with the Bellagio.
Wow.
Well, I am a certified sommelier and trained for 2 weeks at the Bellagio in Las Vegas as a gift from one of my instructors.
Well, thank you all. Those are very interesting fun facts, and I appreciate you agreeing to be on the panel. So we're going to start with you, Anika, and then I'll have each of you kind of kibitz in on this question. The first question is, what drives you as an IT executive to do it yourself internally versus go outside and use a vendor?
Typically, for me, that question comes down to differentiation. So when I think about whether or not it needs to be an internal competency, right? Whether or not we need to have the skill, expertise, those types of things. I think about whether or not for the broader organization, if we're building something that we would consider a part of our secret sauce, right? And so really thinking about the other piece of the skills that would be required to get that done. Are those more commoditized skills? Are they more readily available in the marketplace? Are they so specialized that it wouldn't make sense to have people internally who could do that work? And so those are some of the things that I often think about, but mostly when I think about whether or not to build it ourselves or whether or not to try and source from the marketplace, I think about, is it something that we would consider the secret sauce of the organization? And if we would consider it the secret sauce of the organization, we likely want it closer to the vest, like closer to the cuff, and something that we can be more self-reliant on and about.
Thank you. Scott?
I think Anika framed it really well. I don't have much beyond that. Same thing. The way I think about it is kind of 2 key strategic responsibilities. One is no matter how we source versus internal, we're responsible to solve problems. So we have to kind of do the gut check and judge ourselves. Can we best solve this, or do we need help from the outside? And obviously, the second thing she mentioned, the same thing for us, differentiation. There's a time to source when you have, like you said, you have an operational role that could be better provided for by a sourcing vendor. Mm-hmm. But there's also times when you have aspirations to do more than what we do now. We want to do some things that we haven't done before, and we need a partner that's more strategic to kind of help us guide us through the kind of growing into that. And it could be a scenario where we use a partner to get us started and we take it over. But a lot of times that's the 2 spaces you look for, is where you have commoditized services, and the other spaces where you think we need to differentiate and we want to grow someplace maybe we haven't grown before and we need some help.
Thank you. Mari?
When you're the third person on that, you guys have answered it all pretty well.
Yeah.
It also depends how you're using vendors. So everything you agree 100% if it's related to maybe outsourcing a piece of software or technology. Sometimes I'll go to a direct hire if I'm looking for like augmented resources to actually work in our world. Sometimes I will go to a recruiter vendor to bring those resources in, and that is just because of the speed and to save me time in those particular areas. So you try to find someone who can bring the resources to me. I could do that. We could have our HR do it, but I could also go to somebody whose company solely is the purpose of doing that to save me time and get the talent quicker.
That makes sense. And Jonathan, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'd add to that is, what's the driver of doing it in the first place? Mm-hmm. Is this something that we want to do, something we're investigating as a strategic decision we've made, or are we responding to an external change that is being imposed that someone may already have an answer for that we could modify, incorporate? I think that also plays a huge part in where I go, is it something I have to learn or something I can go buy on the street?
So the next question kind of feeds on that then in terms of, okay, you've decided you're going to go to a vendor. Scott, I'll start with you here. What kind of, the problem you give to the vendor, do you have, you guys kind of talked about this in your prior answers, do you have like a stratification of vendors, like some vendors to handle certain kind of problems versus other vendors to handle other kind of problems? And then a follow-up for you, and I do that for everybody on the panel as we go through it. If you have an example of a time when you used a vendor and it went well, and why, would be very interested.
Yeah, and I will. You're right. I'll layer in what I said as I answered to the first question. The stratification is a good word because there is. I definitely look at our vendors / partners / kind of premier partners as, you know, an earned ranking within our organization of. There's some that just give me some bodies that can do this type of skill, and we need them for 6 months, and then we'll be done. Versus someone that, hey, we're getting to something we don't know much about, and we need some hand holding and some strategic leadership. So I kind of think of definitely ideally, I'd have a set of partners that have a super deep bench and have every skill I need, and I can just say I need that person on Monday, and they show up, and sometimes that's kind of the way the business thinks we can do things, I think. Like, okay, you want to go faster, just bring in some more help. And it's like, that's always a little bit of a naive, I mean, definitely you can do that, but it's, more help isn't necessarily help on day one when they get there. So I do think of at commodity level, and then we have, sometimes there are skills that are core competencies, like in our situation, healthcare, electronic medical record expertise is huge. We got an excellent internal team, but occasionally it's like we got so many goals around that. It would be nice if we can bring in more help for that. So assist our core competency, but not a replacement of our core competency. and then like I said, the third area is when like we want to get into something new, and we might be over our skis if we try to do it ourselves. And how do we get that kind of help?
That makes sense. Do you have an example or a time when a reference or when you dealt with a vendor you want to tell a story about, hey, it really worked? When you pick the right vendor?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things that are very current. So, like for instance, Mercy's opening a brand new multi-specialty surgery center and clinic office building across from our hospital in Creve Coeur, and we had a lot of aspirations around changing the consumer experience in that building. So we actually coordinated with the release of our new mobile app that has location services and auto rooming of a patient, and giving the patient the ability to schedule multiple things at a time. And our bigger story is Mercy's trying to convert from this kind of episodic pipeline transactional healthcare experience to more of a platform coordinated experience. And so this was a big step for us, and so a lot of things we hadn't got into before, some technologies we hadn't done. So we partnered with an organization that had delivered a similar mobile app and worked with our electronic medical record vendor before. And then we're doing all these things with location services, real-time location services, and things around that. So we have other partners that came in and helped us define that. So we own the product management, we own the architecture decision. There's people here that made these designs and decisions, but we needed help. We couldn't do that all ourselves, and so I think that's an example of that last category of we want to do something new. We have the vision, but we don't think we can do it by ourselves. We need help. And eventually, that will be a core competency. We'll own it, but we had to get this jump start from a partner.
So using a vendor who's been there, done that to help you get where you need to go.
Yes, and actually a harmony of 3 or 4 vendors in that situation.
Gotcha. All right.
It's the same with us. If I'm looking, depends what job I'm working on. If I have a large telephony upgrade, which I'm looking at doing now and moving it to the cloud, there's a set of vendors in that arena that we will go to. If I'm looking for, I need a team to help me do a mobile app or web modifications that we don't normally, then you'll go for that. So there really isn't a one-stop shopping. It's depending on what your technology is, who you're partnering with, and how you want to do it. Am I going to offload it as much as possible? Some groups do that. Are they going to come in and help guide me more? Because again, it's my core competency and I want to keep that. So it really depends. So in our roles, you have your lists and you have these contacts that you will go to, and hopefully it works and you continually to go to them.
Any examples that come to mind where you really feel good about the vendor you selected helping you get somewhere?
Several of them, just like I'm saying, in our telephony area that we're looking at, or different cloud efforts that we were in. Mohela wasn't as much of a cloud. We were very much an on-prem because of government contracts. And then groups we have worked with for different cloud growth that we have been doing here. Again, not outsourcing it so they have the knowledge, but working with them and guiding ourselves along the way.
Thank you. Jonathan?
I think for me, a lot of it comes down to how much of the expertise do we want to either share with or offload to the vendor for the given solution. And is this something that we know the business, we know the exact process, we know what we want, how we want things to be built, or are we willing to say, here's sort of our general framework of the problem, what solutions can you bring to the table? I've been on both sides of that house, and when we had one solution, we were working with designing a very esoteric system to capture customer interactions, customer activity with some of our systems, and brought one vendor in to do the base understanding, the base development for it, and then realized they came to us and said, do you realize we could also do this and this and this by adding a couple of fields here, collecting in some other information, giving us a whole new dimension on the analytics and the capabilities of the platform that weren't part of the original requirement. But because of the understanding of the work and how the system had been designed and built, that flexibility, they were able to provide additional value to the company and the scalability. So I think that's one of the cases. The other one that really is important is, and it's related to that, is how closely does the company that the vendor you're looking to listen to and understand not what you're telling them the problem is, but what the problem is. We don't want to build to a requirement. We want to solve a problem. So how can you differentiate yourselves that way as well?
Anika?
Yes, I would definitely echo that. The way that I sort of think about it is in maybe sort of three groupings. I won't necessarily call them tiers, but three groupings. And so I think about solutions, services, and consulting, which I think is different. So solutions meaning like you've developed a tangible product that I want to acquire and implement, and you do that thing really, really well. And typically it goes back to the jobs to be done, like why am I hiring you? Why do I want to work with you? And so my goal is to acquire that thing, integrate it into our ecosystem, and have it be readily used and adopted in more of sort of the contained framework that you've already created. Services, I think about maybe, some people might call it staff augmentation, but what is that sort of skill set, ability to beef up, right? We have, a large implementation of some sort. We need, elbow support for an instance in time. We need to increase the volume of work that we can take through a particular pipeline. And so how do we think about that type of partnership arrangement where you have, some of those skills. And then the advisory services, and, I spent some time at Deloitte, and I used to joke that people hire sometimes advisory services for really three reasons. You actually want an outside-in perspective. So I'm looking for the expertise that's been built externally, and I want to have someone who spent time with other clients harvest that and bring that knowledge so that we can do something different, think differently. Another reason might be we need to deliver a really hard message, and I have to live here and you don't. So come tell the people, right? We appreciate your service, right? And then the third one is like we genuinely don't know the answer, and we need eyes. Come travel this journey with us. And because oftentimes I think consultants have an opportunity to crunch a lot of they tend to go from one difficult situation to another. That's kind of the specialty, right? Come just bring the expertise of living in difficulty to me so that we can think through this really large problem together. And so when I think about it, I tend to think about what is it that I actually need in the moment, And then who are the partners that have been, sort of my experience to best provide that in a given time. And I'm always thinking about who are the new folks in the space and they have new knowledge or they've curated out of something that's really cool that should be a part of that list.
Any specific success stories you want to share?
Absolutely. Had different types of partnerships, but I would say that had an opportunity to work with an awesome design boutique firm. We were really focused on, trying to think differently about how we provided an internal user experience. It's really interesting. Oftentimes we think about providing amazing experiences for our external customers. But having had experiences in really large organizations, 40,000 plus, that sort of CX component of the internal GUI oftentimes gets forgotten. And so we had an amazing sort of back end of a system that was working for the organization. But just through sort of growth and quite frankly, generational change, we were getting people coming in going like, the front end of this thing is awful. Like, you really need to fix this. And so we partnered with a design firm who really understood the business processes, this is more kind of revenue cycle, to help us put a really different front end on it that would allow us to also change business process. And I think that sort of widget of understanding the business process and then having the specialty is always super beneficial.
Thank you. So Mara, I'm going to come to you. So you've chosen a vendor and the engagement's done in whatever form. Do you have any kind of process for figuring out if it was a successful use or engagement with that vendor? Mm-hmm. And then kind of the answer or the following question is, how do you decide whether you're going to use that vendor again?
Great. So the success, it's obviously, like you're saying, how you're using them in the project. So if I'm hiring somebody in because they have more expertise than I do, and I want them to help me on something, or I actually want them to do a component of a software because I don't have enough technology in the house. Either way, you manage the success of it as you would if you were doing it yourself. There's a project plan, there's milestones, there's budgets. Getting vendor support doesn't mean you don't have anything to do. You are still going to commit resources from your team to work with them. It's really not it's not going to be a plug and play. So added to that, the other component when you're working with this vendor is, since I do want the talent learned and understood in ours, there's another piece in there is, are they trained my folks? Have my folks been engaged? Are they able to take it afterwards? If they deliver me a piece of whatever module and afterwards we don't know how to service it, I think that's a fail. Mm-hmm. So when you are contracting with them and working with the vendor, you have to add those training components, that knowledge transfer in order to be an ongoing success. Very rare you can have somebody do a piece and it just plunks in. Also, successes, are they following your process? We all have different processes, whether your house is a CMMI or ITIL or whatever you're doing. If this company is creating this, they have to be to your standards. So you still have to monitor for those that they're going to your standards. So it saves you in many ways, but you're still very much involved. And to make sure that they hit the same requirements that you would require your team to hit on a project is how you'd measure it.
Thanks. Jonathan?
I think to your point, yes, we're going to have deliverables. We're going to have the same set of quality standards that we have to maintain. I think that's sort of table stakes for any relationship and any engagement. What really differentiates to me is, what is the relationship? What's the process and the how do you establish the rapport and the ability to communicate with that vendor, with that team, to are you embedding people on your team into that team and establishing design work? And is it a weekly handover? Are you elbow to elbow working together? Or what's it? There's a lot of those features that go into the soft level of success.
How are you going to transition that knowledge
How
to
are you
your
going to
team?
transition it internally, and whether you're going to decide to work with that group again. I've had some good experiences with working with teams that have been perfectly valid for delivery. They've done exactly what we asked them to do, and I will never work with them again.
Correct.
Because they were just miserable to work with. Others have been, like I say, shoulder to shoulder. It's like, can we do, what about this? How about that? There's a lot of give and take in the relationship, and the act of developing becomes much more cooperative.
They have to match your culture.
Yeah, exactly.
Anika?
I definitely would say number one is that alignment to culture, right? We're always thinking about how to continuously develop our internal teams, right? Always thinking about how to create a great working environment, always thinking about, not that you want to create a huge number of people who leave and come back or a boomerang, but you always want to be a place where people will come back to. The interesting thing is that typically because of the number of vendors that we can work with, vendors have a huge impact on whether or not that's true for the people that you employ. And so I do think that culture piece is incredibly important. I'd also say I am a huge proponent of OKRs and just like clear objective measures right up front in an engagement. And so for me, whatever the engagement looks like, whether that's, staff aug or fixed P or, whether it's time and material, establishing those objectives and key results so that we're on the same page around what success looks like and how we're going to measure that before we actually start the work. And I will tell you, I am a fan of working with partners who will fire me if I'm not holding up my end of the bargain, right? And so while I appreciate people who are seeking the business, I don't want partners who are seeking the business at any opportunity. I want partners who will say, actually, you don't need that right now. Our recommendation is this, or I'm not actually understanding the objective of what we're trying to do before we actually get started, because I think it speaks to the integrity of the relationship.
Exactly.
Scott?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'll elaborate a little bit on the fact that a lot of times we bring in partners when we're creating something new and doing something innovative, and the unknowns are large. And so to me, it's important to have a partner that, yes, definitely give me a solid SOW. We'll track the results, but a lot of projects start with, they end with a whole different set of deliverables than what you planned in the beginning. So I know that our teams deal with that. I expect my partners to be able to take a punch in that regard. Like, okay, here's what we were going, and now we realize this is not what we want to do. We need you to help us pivot. And so to me, my go-to partners that I'll call when my hair's on fire and you got to help us out, or we got something really important, are the ones that have demonstrated in the past that they can zig and zag with us, and admittedly, some of the things are our fault, some of the things are not. But that, and also, the other thing is a lot of times you put a lot of trust in these organizations. So you're working on this, and how's it going? It's going well. Mm-hmm. And when you get to the week before delivery, it's like, there's 4 things still not working. Man, that really makes me angry. We got to have really high transparency. We got to solve problems together. So there's a couple things I want you to be agile and flexible, and know I'm going to be a knucklehead sometimes and send you in the wrong direction for a little while, but be okay with that, and also share your problems so we know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I was just listening to all the words that you were using on this particular topic, and I was in the session before, the heart session. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Empathy, adaptability. You really want your vendors to deliver with heart, because you want them to be empathetic, adaptable, transparent. Makes a lot of sense. So Jonathan, I'm going to come to you with a little bit of a change in scope. Let's talk onshore, offshore. Cost is obviously a big factor, in terms of considering going offshore versus staying onshore. But what other considerations or constraints drive that decision for you? And maybe you can do it, maybe you can't do it, but what do you think about that?
One of the big pieces, in my experience, has been, what's the level of team involvement going to be? How much are we going to be? Are we going to be responsible? How much are we throwing over the fence? If we're throwing things completely over the fence, design, development, so forth, and we are less concerned about the timeliness of change, then we may be more akin to going offshore. Obviously, time to delivery is also a key factor, because that's just because it's cheaper by hour doesn't mean it's going to be done as quickly. But if it's something that we're going to be intimately involved with, and we're going to be having that relationship with while we're developing, while we're building, while we're putting this solution in place, then we can't necessarily afford the 12-hour time change. We don't want to have everybody working 3 in the afternoon till 3 in the morning. So what is the best way? What's the best balance to establish that? And some of that may be pieces go offshore, some of that may be pieces stay onshore, some of that pieces stay near shore. And we try and work the clock in our favor. If it is something that the vendor does have a global presence, then we may have a follow the sun model, especially if we're doing some new rollout where we want to have global support, and we will need that 24-hour on-call availability for real time. So all those things become factors in how you set up the team in the first place. And I think that I haven't found a case yet really where there's a hard distinction on versus off. It's always a question of how much is where.
Anika?
I would agree. I think that there's not purity in on versus offshore. I am a huge fan of an around the sun development model. The thing that I would say, though, is being aware of the things that have to surround an offshore opportunity, right? And so things that come to mind for me is typically if I'm thinking about an around the sun development model, I have a really clear understanding of the job to be done, right? And I can help everyone understand what we are developing toward. I have teams that understand how to partner, right? We have, decidedly an understanding around how to manage to any, communication opportunities. We have decided understanding around how to lead teams in a global environment. We are comfortable with 24/7 support and an understanding of what that looks like. The other thing that I would add to that is, what is the product competency? Right? And so oftentimes we think about, offshore being sometimes, more of an engineering or data science, what we consider deep skill or deep technical skill, but that sort of connection and the people who specifically work in the in-between, the informaticists, data governance, all those things that need to surround that model in order to have it work well. How are we actually doing at those sort of, areas of the fray and at the edge? And are they really infusing themselves into what that model looks like so that we have consistency of tooling, data sources, architectural diagrams, like people really understand how to get the resources that they need to be successful?
Scott?
Yeah, I think in our world, and I guess in general in the healthcare world, I have some opinions that I think the offshore value proposition is not what it used to be, for one thing, a little change in economic conditions. But we do use it occasionally, but we don't. There's not areas where we seek it out specifically because, most of our sourcing hasn't really been a cost savings situation. It's been a strategic enablement situation. So we have partners that have components of what they do offshore. But another interesting thing in healthcare being highly regulated and the fact that with healthcare, on the hospital side, we're very centric around our electronic medical record vendor. And in our case, our vendor has certain parts of the world that they will not allow access to their data or to their screens. So that limits where we can do what. And so it makes the offshoring even more complex for us. But that being said, we do have offshore developers in different parts of the world where it's allowed and where it's reasonable, and that's worked well for us.
All right.
Mine kind of falls on what you were talking about, is understanding what your business will allow you to do. At Mohela, we have federal contracts, so I can't have offshore. It's in there. It's not part of it. And to be working on one of those contracts, we have certain requirements of being U.S. citizen. So when you're working with a vendor, if it's staff augmentation or to bring in a piece of software, you have to let that known up front that these are my limitations. Sometimes that takes somebody out of the picture. And if your business, say your business is the other way, you're offshoring all over the place, but you decide to bid on a federal contract, that may change how you're doing things, and you'll have to be pretty nimble and maybe end contracts or bring in different ones. So since I don't offshore, everything they're saying I agree with, understand your business, where it's going, and what you need to meet your contracts and your obligations with your customers.
Thanks, panel. So we're going to turn to the audience. We got about 10 minutes left. Anybody have any questions for the panel?
So you talked about some attributes of successful partners or engagements with partners, and that have been common I'm curious, when you experience those common attributes, how much does price then come into play in terms of selecting that strategic partner for another opportunity once that trust has kind of been established and earned? Like, what kind of, are you willing to pay what may be a premium relative to their competitors in order to stick with what a trusted relationship?
I'd start. I'd say yes, not categorically, but it was particularly when we're looking for strategic assistance, a vendor that's come through for us in the past, and even one that says we've done what you're trying to do recently, and we're going to use that same team to help you with this. That holds a lot of weight. So we'd definitely be willing to. Price is not the number one consideration when we're looking for who can be our best partner for success.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's not important, but that's a big reason for the second callback.
We don't rely on 100% either on that aspect, because I could save, it could be cheaper, it could cost me a whole bunch more in hand-holding, bringing somebody in. So if I have a trusted commodity, a trusted group, I could save money in the long run, so it balances out overall. So that's not my deciding factor, but obviously an important factor.
Yeah, I'm much the same. It's that relationship is worth a whole lot more than the dollars that are going to be spent. That puts me at odds with procurement periodically, but that's an internal fight that I'm willing to have.
I was going to say that conversation with your category manager is always one that's interesting. The other thing I would say too is that ability to sort of flex over time. Like, we all have good years and not so great years. Typically, the ones that you're willing to call back and pay a premium for, and especially in the good years, are the ones who helped stick with you in the not so great years and were able to flex with you.
Yep. And it also helps if they can be a little creative in how we structure the contracts.
Absolutely.
Go fixed fee and get sometimes to work under. There are ways to game the system.
Don't tell them.
So I'm glad you brought up the comment about dealing with your procurement. So if you're actually have a good relationship with, one of these consultants, but then procurement comes in place, how do you navigate, or when do you navigate that conversation to get them on board? Because we do receive some federal funding. So because of that, there are some different or more hoops that we have to jump through. So when do you start having that conversation?
Yeah, so what I would say is, like, we have, federal and state contracts, and we also have a really strong supplier diversity program, and so we always want integrity in our process. So when we think about, the RFP, the RFI process, I think that integrity comes with, being really clear about what the criteria is, making sure that you're getting that, request for response out to a large, diverse number of vendors to allow for appropriate response. When it comes to those personal relationships, I think much more about getting that vendor, into your vendor contracting program, helping them, get a master services agreement on board, those types of things that become less inhibiting factors when you put out an RFP or an RFI. And so I think there are just maybe different stages of the procurement process, helping support someone through service design with specs. And so I think the relationships are helpful. And for me, those are the types of things that it looks like when I'm talking to my category manager. It's like, let's make sure they at least have an MSA. Let's make sure that we've worked through those processes that would make timeliness or ability to respond more feasible for them, versus if we're sending it out to someone who's never had a relationship.
And sometimes it depends what I'm working on, what my currency is. Sometimes it is the money with procurement. Sometimes my currency is time, and I'm going to pay higher because I have to get this done. So it depends what that is, and speaking with procurement to let them know, yes, this is higher, but you want it in such and such time. It's going to be higher. I could be cheaper, but you're going to take 6 more months. So it's not always, I think we talked about it before, it's not always the cost. It's what's your currency at that time.
I was going to say, I think that's a really great question, Jennifer. And that's not easy. I know for us, it's you got to have a good relationship with your procurement vendor management team as well, because we we need them, and they save the organization a lot of money, and they keep the integrity level where it should be. But there's different. I've found needs to kind of engage them differently. There are situations where, fine, go out to bid. I'll take anybody that can, paint within the lines. And other times we've come through the 6 months, the design strategic process, and we say, here's the solution we want to do, and it's got to be this thing. And then when they come back and say, well, we're going to go out to bid, we found, Acme Consulting that does the same thing, and it's a lot cheaper. Like, no, we can't open this whole design up again. So I think as in technology leadership, we got to, kind of choose the times and how we engage. So I'm okay with going out to bid on these kind of things. This thing is strategic. You got to trust us that this is the right one. We can't really go to bid on this. Yes, help us get the best contract terms, and don't let us get taken advantage of. But you got to trust us on this one.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. That's okay. Sorry about that.
Not here.
What's your source for thought leadership, something new in terms of disruption? How do you pick those ideas? Do they come from the business? Do they come from, what are your sources? And if they're coming from the business, how do you manage the vendor selection and execution and the associated risk in that? And, managing expectations with the business and all that stuff.
Never discount the business's ability to come up with a good idea. A lot of times we will get, in our business partnership, we'll get the business telling us what the solution's going to be from a technology perspective. And those are always fun conversations. But I think that their intention is good. It's not always a buzzword bingo. A lot of times they're grounded in real concepts, reality. They've been talking to their friends, their vendors, their people that they know about. So there are things that we can learn and we can take from them, from the business and from our external vendors as well. A lot of it is, a lot of the thought leadership, at least at Mastercard, is we do have people that are out involved with other business groups involved in events like this, learning all the time. So we have some fairly good thought leadership internally that we can bring back from events, and we're always working with our partners to say, what have you heard about this topic? Yes, we know ChatGPT just passed the bar, but can we use it for X? So I think it's a good partnership between all three.
Absolutely. So I would just add to that, one of my goals as a leader and thought partner is that it's an interesting thing to ask your leadership team, how many of them would consider themselves technologists, right? Versus how many would consider themselves a business leader. My perspective in healthcare, really and beyond, is that we're coming to a place where everyone should raise their hands as a technologist, because there isn't really a business that's being run without that. And so for our business leaders, while there may be, sort of a level of layers, they may not understand the technology beyond the app layer, right? But they understand the tools that are being provided to run and sustain their businesses, and where they need those tools to align to the strategic direction that they're moving in. And so I think the goal for me is to always make sure that there is a lockstep movement with the business and how that thought leadership comes together. I think, to your point, the goal is to understand the jobs to be done. So what do you see as the problem areas? Bring me your problems. Bring me your huddled masses. Please don't bring me your solutions. We can think through those things together, right? And how we partner to get to that solutioning. And some of it will be, I will better understand your problem because I better understand your business, and you will better understand the tech stack and the solutions that can solve that problem.
We try to do that with a lot of our business analysts or PMs to really understand the business. Like you're saying, everybody must be a technologist, but you have to understand the business. Granted, at Mercy, I guess you're not doing surgery to go use their tools, but my guys on the call center are, we have them on the phones learning the systems that we have. So when the business does come and say we want to change, they go, oh, I understand why. I actually used some of the stuff we created.
So we've kind of come to the end. First of all, I want to thank the panel for taking the time and all their thoughts. Thank you. back to that card I talked about at the start. We're doing some research with a couple of our clients on trying to figure out what is the right IT response based on the problem or the capability request the business comes to you with. We've talked about these. We've kind of come up with these 3 or 4 factors: problem uncertainty, how well do we understand what needs to be done? Solution uncertainty, do we have an idea what we should do? How many organizational components are involved? How complex is the team? And then the technology complexity. We'd like to get dialogue from any of you in this room that would like us to help us with this research. So on that card is a QR code that you can click on. You can sign up. We'd love to talk to you. There's no selling involved in this. We're simply trying to understand, because we have a couple clients. I was really chuckling a little bit about the finance and procurement, the category manager, and the business, and the IT being in the middle. And it's like, why can't you go offshore? Why can't you use this cheap thing? And it's like, well, there's a lot of things to think about. And they asked us, they said, could you help us think through so we can face the business and be responsive, but also face finance and procurement and say we're being judicious with the funds of the company. So anyway, to the extent that you're also struggling with this, you're in the middle between your business partners and finance and procurement, we would love your thoughts to enrich this. And anybody who participates will get, the fruits of what we come up with. So once again, thank you for taking the time. I know your time, it's one thing we all get the same amount of. Thank you for taking 45 minutes and spending with us.
Thank you.